Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another live stream edition of the Biblical Anarchy podcast. I am Jacob Winograd here in the LCI Green Room, and I'm joined by a special guest tonight. We're going to have conversation about libertarian legal theory, about libertarians debating against nationalists and right-wing populists. It's probably no secret to most of you who are watching that I have recently debated Andrew, and then more famously, Andrew debated Dave Smith on the Crucible. I threw Michael Knowles in the thumbnail just because I wanted to balance it out, and I essentially, even though I just think it's ironic because Andrew is usually spurging against the Daily Wire crew, but him and Michael Knowles have almost the same exact views. So, which came up in my debate with him, so it was kind of funny. But our guest for tonight, so I'll do a little brief introduction here. It's going to be a weird show. We kind of talked pre-show how we're going to do this. Our guest tonight is Kasimir. As you can see in his little subtitle there, he's an objective law AnCap and a contrarian debate me bro, self-described. And so he also, excuse my voice, I'll probably be drinking a lot of water tonight. I'm still getting over that nasty throat cold. It seems to be going around all over the place. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter saying that they've been dealing with a nasty little summer bug. Yeah, but Kasimir, I had actually encountered him a while back on some X Spaces back when I had engaged with Dave and Liquid Zulu over the immigration drama of early 2024, and then encountered Kasimir again when I started engaging with the Crucible crowd, because Kasimir is a regular on there, debating and
Indeed.
defending the great tradition of anarcho-capitalism. And he has, obviously as an ANCAP, and I'm a self-described ANCAP, we have a lot of areas of agreement, but also a lot of areas where we either disagree or we have different ways of arguing things or describing certain things. And so we're going to be sort of using this conversation to do kind of two things. We're going to start out, I'm actually going to almost, metaphorically speaking, hand the host role over to Kasimir, and he's going to kind of grill me on, just kind of question me on some of my beliefs, my definitions, and my priors, which will kind of help us to suss out, sort of like where him and I stand in alignment, and where, maybe we need to hash some things out. And then once we get past that part, I want to talk about, how these ideas translate to the debates that I've had and that Dave have had with Andrew, and with the ways that maybe these debates can go better in the future if we can find ways to refine the arguments and also demonstrate the weaknesses in the opponent's arguments. So anyway, I think I've laid out the groundwork pretty well there, Cass. If you want to make any
Yeah, I
opening
agree.
remarks, you can, and then you can put me in the hot seat.
Yeah, there's a reason why we need to do this. It's very annoying to watch libertarians debate. Very often, most of our popular figures don't really know what they're doing. They don't consider it serious. They sort of demean the debaters, and because of that, libertarians often lose debates. Most of them, most of the time, lose. I don't think that's necessarily hopeless or bad. In fact, I believe a proper, glorious arc is to lose a lot and then win once, but permanently, and with, with a lot of conviction and with convincing a lot of the audience.
Well, like we
And
talked
this is
about, we talked about this right at the beginning, but before we hopped on. But like, when I went on the Crucible to debate Andrew, I sort of went in with my defenses down, like, because I could have like tried to appeal to the moderator or use counter debate tactics, but I was there more to be like, well, I want to try to defend my worldview, but I also want to see where maybe I don't have effective arguments that I need to go back and refine some of my ideas, because that's kind of the purpose of debate, especially formal debate, is to sort of challenge your intellectual rigor and debate skill. And so that's I did debate in high school, so I've always been a bit of a debate junkie. It's might be an acquired taste for some, especially the way Andrew does it, but I quite enjoy it, and I think there's a great utility to it. And yeah, it's like I don't care if I lose a debate, because that just means it's an opportunity to keep learning and keep going. You only really lose if you just give up, rather than using it as anyway, a reason to keep going. Anyway, I don't want to keep interrupting you, but I just thought
no, it's fine.
I'd add on to what you were saying, because I agree.
I'll counter some. I'll use the power of chat to actually fill in the gap here. By the way, I prepared for this stream just as rigorously as top libertarian debaters prepare for their debates typically. Okay, just to keep things fair. Right? This is a free flow of ideas here. So somebody asked where I'm from. I am from mostly the United States of America, with a little stint in Israel, and I was born in Russia, as you can guess from the accent. And somebody said, my friend actually, August, is saying, "Oh, I'm not a fan of blood sports." No, I'm a fan of properly done blood sports. I love the snappy retort. I would have drank that tea, and I debate people like you. Those two retorts are some of my favorites recently. So having that as part of a debate is nice, but the blood sport has to reinforce an idea. You can't just insult somebody. That's not interesting. But if you have a winning idea, if you've countered their point, and you spice it up by calling them a big dummy, that's fun. You got to admit it, right? It brings it. Timing is important. It's like in comedy. It has to be properly timed. And what I hate in debates, absolutely, is the opposite, which is the whining, the complaining, the coping, oh, life is so unfair to me. The spotlight is upon me and I don't know what to say. Well, that's why you prepare. Every improvisation is a good prep. Now, let's go about what is the core of libertarian debates and what questions I will ask. In my mind, simply, we are jurists. We are people who bring forth to the world the idea that law can either be objective, which is my position, or at least contractually defined, and that is a sufficient function of it, meaning it can describe to you who is a criminal, and it can describe to you who is a law-abiding citizen, and that is enough. I don't believe that libertarianism should answer moral questions at all. So there's a hint. And in fact, the libertarians, in my mind, that bring moral ideas into sort of the group discourse, I like to call them libertines, because they're more about the idea of having freedom than the idea of non-aggression. So you can build very authoritarian societies under the non-aggression principle, such as, for example, my home. When you enter my home, you're going to obey my rules, including the things you're allowed to say, and including your dress code, and many other intrusive things, right? So I think we all understand that, and that is the core of libertarian approach to things. It's not about having everything rosy or doing whatever you want, and this is where these debates get annoying. Also, I believe as a libertarian, because this is a legal theory, there are some fundamental core questions that you just have to answer really quickly and fairly precisely. And if your language is not precise, it's going to be used as an inroads, as a weakness in debates. So let's start. Let's get straight on. What is the number one question that any libertarian should ask another libertarian to sort of check them, or a statist to frame the debate properly? Well, let's get Jacob. What is a conflict?
Well, I would say conflict is where two or more people or parties are having some sort of disagreement over something.
Okay. What is in libertarian terms, what is important for libertarians as a
For
conflict? There's a
yeah,
narrower
if we're talking
version of it.
in libertarian terms, we're probably usually talking about property. So I think of like Hoppe, how he describes that the 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 utility in privatizing everything is that all scarce resources have assigned ownership, and this helps us to either prevent conflict, or when conflict arises, we go, all right, well, you guys are fighting over this boat. Well, who owns the boat? They are the one who can control, the boat, exclude other people from the boat. So, conflict is easily resolved. So conflict would usually be over scarce resources, such as usually property, or it could be, you trying to hurt me, which is, the ultimate property is your body. You own yourself. So
Self-ownership, right? Exactly.
yeah,
I would, if I were to correct you, I would say the word ownership is key. The word property is shaky. And there's a great lecture by Stephen Kinsella on this topic, on the topic of shaky words that we still use, dangerous metaphors. Perhaps we'll link it in the comments later on. But this is a good answer. But it's very simple. The simplest version I've seen was that conflict is contradictory action, meaning when two agents try to do something and they can't do the same thing at the same time. They can stand in one place. They can't use the same means at the same time. Anything that can happen at the same time, for example, we can express the same idea at the same time. We can use the same technology at the same time. We can write the same book at the same time. All of those things would not be libertarian conflicts. And in fact, this is our avenue of attack against many statists. What they present are often as moral dilemmas, are often non-conflicts. Libertarians have no opinion on them.
This is a triggering question now in the
My next one. How would you demonstrate self-ownership? How would you ground it in philosophical terms?
Well, I guess I would appeal to what's formally called as argumentation ethics, which I felt like Dave was sort of trying to do, although it wasn't the best presentation, but just kind of like, well, I mean, we're having a conversation here, and in order for us to have a conversation, you're kind of coming with the assumption that, well, you're coming with several assumptions. You're coming with the assumption that I can understand what you're saying, and that you can understand what I'm saying, that the words coming out of my mouth are mine, the words coming out of your mouth are yours. You've shown that you value truth, because we're having a conversation. That means that you prefer truth over falsehood. You probably are. You kind of have to be appealing to some kind of objective truth, objective reality. And so I guess like the logical conclusions that come from this line of thinking are essentially that you have to, whenever you're engaging in an argument or a conversation, you are recognizing that the other person effectively owns themselves. Now, I guess and I think Dave was fuzzy on this, and honestly, I'm a little bit fuzzy on this as well. Like when I debated Andrew. Well, let me just, I'll because like when I debated Andrew, I essentially, I'm clipping a bit. Let me lower my mic a bit. I essentially just conceded that it's kind of a social construct, and I got a feeling that is where you're going to bring the correction and say it's not a social construct, and I don't know if this is going to be a fundamental disagreement, or maybe an area where I'm wrong, or maybe it's semantics. But it's not something that I can. Also, just to be completely clear, this is something where I could be fuzzy because of my Christian beliefs. Because as a Christian, I would kind of say that I think God owns me and God owns everything, but God has granted me stewardship over my body, but that within the realm of like my relationship to you and your relationship to me, I essentially act as a self-owner. So that's kind of why I describe it as a quasi-social construct, but I'm open to hearing where you think that's incorrect or insufficient.
So let's go from the Christian part. In the Ten Commandments, God describes himself as the one who brought you forth from slavery in Egypt. Maybe I'm paraphrasing not one-to-one, but he is a liberator of what? Not of the relationship between man and God. That's a relationship that cannot be fully liberated, although to some extent it is. But specifically, the Ten Commandments speak about relationships between men and men. And what do they say?
Right.
There's
Vertical
one God
versus horizontal relationships.
Right.
Yep.
There was one God. You can't have others. Anything on earth, in the heaven, in the water, there's a lot of description there. Nothing can be God or divine or another God. In Christian theology, God can enter the world and influence it by bringing forth the Trinity or the burning bush or other examples, but that's considered almost an exception. Whereas in all other, nobody else can do it, let's just say. So there, if somebody proclaims himself, as people used to do, as the Pharaoh that's God on earth, the Ten Commandments reject that. And so even in Christianity, when a Christian nationalist tells you, or a Christian populist tells you, well, you're still a slave of God, so what? Libertarianism is not about the relationship between God and man. It's about man to man.
Yeah. This is how I often
and they
describe
can't
it.
reject that on those grounds.
Yep.
In fact,
I made this exact argument.
The Ten Commandments
to Andrew.
support us. So the Ten Commandments say that they basically outline the non-aggression principle. They say you cannot steal, including you cannot steal a life. You can take a life, but you cannot murder. So there is an idea of justifiability there. What the Ten Commandments don't do quite well, in my opinion, is they don't explain what is this weird thing of justifiability. And because of that, many people believe that justifiability is a social construct. Self-ownership, which is at the core of justifiability, is a social construct. But I think that word social construct is sort of meaningless. So what is it? I want to just briefly talk about it. I believe that meanings, or at least many of them, are discovered. So things like the circle, the meaning that we typically attach to that word, that there's equidistant line to a point that makes up the circle, that's something that you discover that is objective, that is independent of the mind. There may be some meanings that are sort of selected intersubjectively because they're useful to us, but I don't think that they are that many of them are socially constructed. So how do you find a meaning that's very hard, that's objective? You have to see whether it can be something else. So in objectivist epistemology, which I can use here, I believe, they don't use the word grounding for basic laws, but they believe that they're validated, meaning something is valid if you have no way to invalidate it. Meaning existence exists. There's no way to invalidate that. The fundamental laws of logic cannot be invalidated.
So let me see if I can anticipate where this is going, because I think what you're going to say is that because, like within Christian ethics, we would say, do not steal, do not murder, that if you're if you were going to posit that the justification is self-ownership, and how would you demonstrate that's true? Well, let's assert the opposite. If you don't own yourself, can you then make claims to theft or murder being wrong? And the answer is you really couldn't. And so therefore it's either self-ownership's either valid or not, and if you can just as you did there demonstrate it's invalid, leads to a logical absurdity, then you have to conclude that it's valid based on murder and theft being. Now, I think the problem is guys like Andrew are slippery with this. Like, I don't know if you saw when I called in for the Q&A, I tried to nail him on when is taxation theft. Because to me, theft is he's like, oh, well, if you're taking it from rich people to give to poor people, that's theft. But if it's for infrastructure, it's not. I was like, why? Like, it's still stealing. And he's sort of like, by his standard, it's just like, it feels like it's an arbitrary. It's like, well, it's stealing when I don't like it, but when I do like it, it's fine.
Jacob, in baseball, there's a concept of stealing a base, right?
Right.
How does it work? he starts running, and if you don't throw the ball to the catcher and the catcher doesn't tag him, then he steals a base.
Right.
Andrew is a professional debater with experience, will
Yeah.
steal every base. However, you also know that when somebody attempts to steal a base, they're also very vulnerable, because if you do tag them, you've eliminated them, you've scored a major point, and that's when you grandstand and mock them. You say, Andrew, also now you believe that contradictions are true. Very interesting for somebody who believes in objectivity and truth and logos. Very interesting how things can be both true and false at the same time. And then, but you have to first establish what is theft. What is this aggression of taking something that belongs to somebody? And you have to establish it not as a social construct, which you can do without argumentation ethics, merely linguistically, by going through what is the words that point to different meanings. The meanings have to be distinct. So a circle has to be distinct from a square. Otherwise, what's the point of naming them differently? So in libertarian terms, ownership, which is the key word for us, after conflict, ownership comes next, has to be distinct from another key word, which is possession. So what Andrew is saying is that he can possess the money of the rich person to provide it for the poor or for some social program that he believes in. But he can't ever say that he owns that money, because he can't own that money, because ownership cannot come through theft. It has to come through a voluntary exchange or homesteading or as punishment for a crime, which is something libertarians forget about. So this is sort of where you should focus. And so the question should be, what is a conflict? And then, okay, self-ownership. How do you prove self-ownership? Well, one of the things is that you can disprove is you can disprove various systems of. First of all, you should disprove the idea that a latecomer can own anything, a latecomer to a resource. And it's done very simply, because to make a distinction between ownership and possession, we've discovered so far only one objective distinction. Who's there first? I'm talking about original appropriation, not trade or crime. Those are separately proven separate things. But core ownership is...
Well, it would have to be, I mean, I think I get what you're saying, but like, I can't like show up to a plot of land and just be like, well, I was here first, it's mine, and then leave it the same way it was. And then if someone comes back later, be like, well, I was here first, and it's still mine, even though you started building a home there. It doesn't matter.
Correct. So now there is, we introduce another element, which is, what are we doing here, actually? Well,
right.
We're trying to, there's 3 ways to deal with conflicts. There are only 3 possible ways, 3 categories. One of them is the objective law, natural law, or Vardian natural law, the essence of libertarianism, non-aggression. That's, you avoid conflicts all the time. There's no exception. The other way is you ignore the idea of a conflict. You don't care. You just deal with possession. You just take if you have the power to take. You convince others to become slaves voluntarily, quote unquote. You like trick people. You engage in false debating where you make contradictory points and they get trapped into that lack of logic. So you do all of those things, and including raw violence. So that's the alternative, right? It's not just violence. It's also being dishonest and being Hegelian and being contradictory. And then there is the middle ground, which is where most of society exists, which they do believe in non-aggression in certain instances. As Andrew says, I do believe that theft is generally wrong, but in certain other instances, somehow, magically, precisely, like mystically, suddenly there's an exception, which is exceptions don't exist in deontological absolute morality, something that Andrew follows and other Christians follow. And exceptions also can't exist in any moral or legal claim. It just escapes the definition. Why have a law? When you do that, you wrap around and just go back to possession, to mere use of force. Okay? So I think this is where things get often lost in that debate.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think what can confuse it maybe for guys like Dave or me is when we are religious, and so there's an area of overlap with guys like Andrew in terms of we do kind of believe in, like, I even said in my debate with Andrew, I do think morality comes from God's decrees, but I think God's decrees are moral imperatives that are like universally binding, whereas it seems Andrew defines God's decrees as sort of like they're all over the place. They're
No,
like,
he was doing what's called an internal critique, where he doesn't have to defend his own position. All he has to do is attack yours. By the way, we should
sure.
actually talk about this briefly. The worst debate proposition the libertarian can propose or accept is to say libertarianism is better than a moral system. Let's say libertarianism is superior to Christianity. There is no more incoherent of a proposition possible in the debate. It makes the classical error, by the way, of comparing is statements with odd statements. It's like saying, conflating a description of reality with what we believe it should be. Those are not the same things. Saying you shouldn't be a criminal is different from saying you are or you are not a criminal.
So yeah, this is what you talked to Dave about at the end of your his debate with the Crucible. You were the last caller, and I'm still like, I kind of get your point, but I also have, and we talked a bit about this privately, and here I'm gonna share my screen quick just to show this. I hope this actually shows well. Because last time
I did
tried
this.
Presenting it didn't, but
I did this mistake, or like maybe inefficiency of. I should have explained the point I was going to make and then present the analogy. But I did the opposite. Oh,
fine.
this picture, yes.
Yeah. So like, because I hear what you're saying, that like they're two different things, but then like, and this chart came from someone who I think is kind of somewhat in your camp, Monarcho Hopian on X, and this is always kind of how I've always seen it, that it's kind of like there's an overlap between legal action and moral action, and
yeah,
and
there's all human actions. Some of them are legal, some of them are criminal, and then within the realm of legal actions, there are some actions that are subset that are moral. So, for example, it is perfectly legal for me to evict a person out of my apartment into a snowstorm without prior agreement to keep them safe, but it would be possibly highly immoral based on some moral system that I subscribe to. And I think, again, let's talk about this instinct. In a debate where you do defend the libertarian position, you are allowed at one point to talk about moral prescriptions, how to establish a moral society, and or like how to answer these questions. We'll go over the typical questions you're going to be asked. I'll ask you some of those, but my hint is that you always answer them after a key point in the debate. That key point in the debate is when your opponent concedes that objective law exists. You have to force that concession. You have to say, you're talking to a libertarian, this is how I define things. This is the sort of, these are the series of dichotomies we went through. Possession, ownership, conflict, non-conflict, aggression, initiation of conflict, non-aggression, non-initiation of conflict. If you've agreed with me so far, then let's formalize that agreement, say that you agree, and then ask me whether it's practical to implement. Whether it's practical or impractical to implement is a question for the consequential utilitarian mindset of wishing to have a good outcome. But as a deontologist, which is something that Christians are very familiar and friendly towards as a concept, sometimes the moral choice and the legal choice leads to your doom. and you accept that as the consequence of being a moral and a law-abiding person. If you were given a choice between committing an atrocity or staying alive, at certain points in your life, you might say, not gonna stay alive. I'm not gonna commit an atrocity, right? And it's a very popular idea: live free or die, more or less.
Yeah.
So once we recognize that, then we can go to the consequential parts. And I lost the debate like this. So most of my bad debates about libertarianism were against Christian populists, where I just allowed them to draw me into answering a series of questions about how do you deal with this or that degenerate
before
or
defining
unlikable activity. Exactly.
Yeah, before you define what you think the objective law system is, which and I think I was too in my debate. I think it was a split-second thing when he brought up. He didn't bring up incest with me. He brought up necrophilia and bestiality, and I miscalculated and kind of was like, well, I don't want to sit here and deal with a bunch of, oh, you're not a real Christian crap for the next like hour. And I was just kind of like, trying to say, oh, well, those aren't laws that I'm particularly concerned with at the moment.
As a libertarian, you have to bite the bullet, or in this case, eat that corpse. Okay? And perform all the incest, by the way, as a libertarian, because it's not a core libertarian problem. Self-harm, harm to society, which directly influence, by the way, this is something that makes me very angry. The meme of the libertarian that says, well, how does it affect me personally, while there's, apocalypses behind them in the meme? Society is falling apart. I can explain to you directly why incest harms you. As soon as you concede to the idea that there are limits to the type of enforcement you can do while claiming to be a non-criminal. If you want to be a criminal and talk about how criminals can solve world problems, fine. It's no longer a debate about libertarianism. So, let's answer this. Your children that you are going to probably want to have and love are going to marry into general society. And so all of those strangers that you, Mr. Libertarian, supposedly don't care about, they will become your family. They will live near your family. You're going to be surrounded by them. So if you believe that you can just like live and let live, really no. Libertarianism is not about live and let live. It's about how you are allowed to restrict other people or not. Because we know that restricting people, the game of power, the game of politics, is more toxic than necrophilia, more toxic than incest. And this is why I love speaking to you, because you said something that just triggered me immediately into, if you're asked, you are going to be asked crude questions. Libertarians on debate discords ask them of each other all the time. I used to not like this for good reasons, but for you, this is and for Dave Smith and others, it's very important. You should know how to ask them as well. As soon as you bite the bullet and say, I'm not going to steal a penny to save the world, you have to ask them, how many billions of children are they willing to destroy in as grotesque terms as the stream allows you to say that, in order to save the world? Because that's the other extreme. They're pushing you towards, something that appears like nonsense, but in the realm of justifiability, that's the next thing. It's the trolley problem where you get to do whatever you want because you decided on an outcome that you desire.
So let me see if I can steelman your what you're saying here, because I think I agree, but I want to be able to repeat it back to you in my own words. So you're saying that there's almost two conversations. You could, in a different debate, or after the debate, or at least after you've established libertarian legal theory as an objective law, you could say, all right, listen, so like leave libertarian off the table now. We can deal in the world of the statist paradigm we live in and decide from like a consequentialist perspective, what's better or worse. Like, sure, if you want to do that, it's fine, but that needs to be like, you need, for kind of like a pun here, you need a strong border between that conversation and the conversation of what libertarianism is and if it's valid. And so when Andrew or people like him go like, well, what about incest? What about necrophilia? What about bestiality? What about suicide? You're saying if the debate's on libertarianism, what you would just first say is, well, no, I don't think that the state should exist. I don't think those laws should exist, and I think that libertarian legal theory provides you means to, within your through things like covenant communities or incorporated cities, you can more effectively, if you want to have a community that doesn't allow for those things, you can do that using libertarian means. And I would try to say that in the debate. I think it's a better way.
It's not just more effectively. It is like a deontological position that even if it was less effective, you can say it's less effective in the short term or it's less effective under certain conditions. You still have to choose it because you choose a world where you're not engaging in the criminal actions over the world where you do.
Well, like,
and then you say, listen, I'm happy to talk about covenant communities. I'm happy to talk about AnCap effectively monarchs that rule a Liechtenstein and can close the borders, can evict everybody, because when you come into that society, you actually sign a physical document that says, if I don't follow local rules and I get evicted for violating those rules, then I'm going to be evicted, also possibly lose all my property as an incentive. And if somebody comes into that contract and comes into that rental exchange with a property owner, then it's their voluntary choice. We are only against the establishment of the initial borders by means of theft and aggression. Right. We're not against doing highly authoritarian things on those borders once the borders are established.
Sure. And so the so one could say that I agree, it kind of depends on a time frame, and it's never perfect, but I mean, I think Dave brought this point up well. Like, it's not like the state's perfectly, like, unless you want a massive surveillance state, it's like they're going to catch every single case of all those different examples that Andrew was bringing up and preventing them anyway. So it's sort of like a kind of a non sequitur, I guess. But yeah, I think I agree. I think that establishing
there's a connection here you can also draw with the Christian, the populist kind, which is the law of oligarchy, the power theory. When you establish the tool of power as theft, that you're allowed to steal a penny, what happens is the greatest thief is going to be the person who is going to achieve the power, the person who can distribute the power to as few as necessary of a keys to hold on to power is going to be there.
Right.
And it's going to select evolutionarily, which is something they also, well, not as like culturally, it's going to select away from the people who are Christian, and it's going to select the people who exercise power more effectively, because Christianity is a baggage to somebody who just wants to exercise raw power, like some Stalin or Pol Pot or whoever.
And I think from the Christian perspective, it almost feels like what Andrew is creating is a sort of Christian morals are just basically ends justify the means. And I think that's a very, like, because he's almost like, well, I don't care about the means, I care about the outcome. And I sort of believe that the problem is that you can't disconnect ends from means, because a lot of times means become ends. And now it's hard to articulate this point well, because it's easy to make this argument and then someone go, well, that sounds like you're a consequentialist. It's like, well, no, I'm not a consequentialist. I think that, and really this is a Christian principle, it's like the truth will set you free. I think if you're not operating from a basis of truth and objective truth and objective morals, then it doesn't really make sense how you could act in a way that's immoral, inconsistent, and not objective, but then end up in ends that are like moral and you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's a way of describing what you're getting at.
This is rejected by the very power theory that they believe in. If you believe in what Curtis Yarvin is writing, if you believe in what McIntyre is telling you about, you should also believe that. And if you believe in things like the Dictator's Handbook and how keys of power work, that this is a theory that is highly explanatory of reality, that we observe it all the time. We observe that if there is a relatively pro-market guy that becomes the head of socialist Russia, which is Vladimir Lenin, that the next guy that replaces him is not going to be the Trotskyite. It's going to be the Stalin, who is an ex-con, who is going to be in charge of the intelligence agency, finding garbage on everybody, and pitching groups against groups until he executes all his enemies. That's what you're going to get. And in fact, a good attack against, including Orthodox Christians, is to mention those moments in their history. You had moments where, over minor disagreements in Christian morality, in minor disagreements in how you make the symbol of Christ with your hand, minor disagreements over how you genuflect and perform other rites, over minor disagreements, thousands of people were murdered, robbed, families destroyed, to the point where the schism in Russia was such that people who were pro-reform rejected the reforms based on the way they were implemented. They said, this is not justifiable. The means are so egregious. We're going to oppose the reforms that we generally agree with. We want to become more like the Greeks and less like Russians, but we're not going to do that by violating basic 10 commandments. And this is something that I believe Andrew actually agrees with, where the proper Christian approach is to build the shining city on the hill, on private property, and have people come and say, I'm willing, come in from the hunger, come in from the cold, and say, I'm willing to follow your Christian ethics because I want to join your community, because my, degenerate, pissing in the street incest community didn't work out. And then at the moment, you're going to sign a contract that says you're never going to get the vote, and perhaps you're going to have severe limits on the amount of property you can acquire, of ownership you can acquire within the society. Maybe your children will get, a pass, because that's how you establish a strong, high-trust society. Is you build private borders, and the reason why they have to be private, because you can't start out by enabling crime. If you start out that way, you're going to slide towards more and more and more crime. You're going to excuse more and more stuff. All of your nice intentions, you're going to have mission creep. And this is the history that we've discovered. The history of all democracies, all republics, all authoritarian regimes is mission creep. They start doing things they weren't initially authorized to do.
Yeah. No, I think this was, similar arguments I was trying to make to Andrew, which is that I think the incentives of power create they're perverse incentives. And even if maybe the first generation you establish is the most moral men and they have the best intentions, it's like, okay, but what happens, in the next generation, right? Like, even because, I think democracy is worse because there's constant turnover, but even in a monarchy, that might, heck, even just using biblical arguments. I tried making this to Andrew, look at just the biblical narrative of Israel. Most of the kings were failures, and even the good kings had moments of corruption of the power, and they get consumed with trying to protect their power and wealth. And I think that's kind of what I was saying earlier. If you build things off a faulty premise, faulty in terms of not being objectively grounded in truth and what is good and moral, you're I mean, that's kind of what Jesus, like, if you build your house in the sand, then when the the sea will sweep it away, or if you build it on the rocks, then it'll hold. And I think what we're kind of describing here is that yeah, private, and I agree with this. I know Dave would agree with this, that, like, yeah, this is, when you discover private law, when you discover Rothbard and Hoppe and all these ideas of how this is the best way to construct society, it might not always look that way in like a very narrow, short term, high time preference way, because some people have a hard time, like, they're just like, well, what if there's like an immediate problem right now I want to take care of, and it seems to them like what we're proposing, it takes too much time or too much work, because like maybe market and contracts and whatnot can be, I don't know, it can seem like it's,
Yeah, there's another core debate idea here. Let's say that you're having a bad day and you're in a debate and somebody convinced you to steal the penny. For consequentialist idea, like some consequentialist idea, like some immediate gain, you just want to steal the penny in that debate. You want to save the starving child on stream. One thing you can say, which would be very much highlight that distinction between the legal descriptions and the moral prescription, is you would say, I would steal the penny, but I would be a criminal. I would steal the apple from the orchard to feed the hungry child, but I would consider it a crime. And in fact, I would have to find the owner, pay restitution, pay retribution, and I would not advocate it as an ought or anything legal remotely.
So this is like when when Andrew pressed me or Dave on your brother wants to unalive themselves. So what Dave could have done would be like, well, yeah, I would want the state to do that, but the state would be violating self-ownership, and that would be a crime in an objective sense. Or like if I were to do it, it might be a crime. Or I don't even know if that would you agree that,
well,
because to me that's a tough area, because I don't know if.
So I answered that question in the debate. Here's what I did. So if I see somebody who's suicidal, a relative,
like, are they of sound mind is what I wonder. Like, does that come into equation?
So I have to wager exactly whether they're of sound mind. In the moment, I stop them. Then I discover whether I performed a crime or not. However, here's an important concept we haven't covered yet, which is core to libertarian law and ethics. It's communication. You were right to criticize. Ownership is not just first comer. It is the first comer that communicates successfully to all the latecomers. This is mine, and I intend to keep it. You communicate that by building and maintaining a fence, a border, a visible barrier, a label that says this tree, this forest, this hill, this home is my home. Now, a lot of this language could be sort of intersubjective, local, communal. People can sort of understand it, but the more accurate you are, the closer you are into like a court case where you have to resolve the problem, you will strive towards being as objective as you possibly humanly can, down to the level of the atoms. That's how objective you would want to be, right? And so,
right.
So let's talk about this example. Let's say that the person says, well, I wanted to do this and you stopped me and you've imprisoned me. Well, I would say that's not what you communicated. What you communicated is that you were not of sound mind, and when I was stopping you, I saw that you were not in the right mind. Therefore, I took guardianship over you temporarily to rescue you, which is a wager I can do. And I'm not even a criminal in that moment. However, if that person, that relative, tells me that they intend to follow through with that act, and nothing I can do will stop them, and now my recourse is to put them in prison for the rest of their life, Andrew would say yes. But then you get to grandstand and criticize that decision. You're going to say, what type of a life are you saving if the person is convinced that to end everything, and you're going to put them in prison, in shackles? Are they going to be able to live if they really want to end it all? if you spend several years trying to convince them to not do it, and they still, in every moment where you give them any amount of freedom, they still decide to do it, in that sort of hypothetical, are you going to keep them in prison? And if he answers yes, it sort of, it shows
Where's
itself
the line?
as,
I wonder. Like, when would you know you've exhausted, like, reasonable, and I guess actually this moves into a question I had for you, because I know that like you're in the same crowd as like Liquid Zulu, and I was I despite the fact that I had some run-ins with Zulu, I still listen to his content. I don't hate the guy. We had a very bad start to our interactions. But there was this one debate he was doing with an actual lawyer, and the lawyer said something that really kind of stuck out to me, and I've been trying to suss this out, and this kind of gets to what we're touching on, because he was like, Zulu was saying, well, contract theory is, it comes after property theory, right? Or like, valid claims of ownership. It's like, okay, but we often describe like anarcho-capitalism as private law, right? A polycentric legal order. And I feel like there's almost like a bit of a confusion here. This was almost the same confusion that you and Dave had in your conversation, where it's like, what do we mean by law? Are we referring to law in like the abstract? Like what is the discoverable truth about the law in like and the law is objective, versus like what we end up having as law, whether that's right now in a state, or even like, I think you would agree that in a polycentric legal order, there are bound to be times where even private law arbitrators are going to have laws that are not perfect, that are not going to be perfectly comporting to what we would, like, and we as humans might not ever get to a point where we have perfectly. And this is what I'm getting at. It's like, because it's like, I guess what I'm getting at to compare this to the example is like, I'm thinking of this like, well, how would you know when you've committed a crime? And like, in a private law society, there's not, it doesn't seem to me apparent that there'd be one answer for that, right? Like, it seems like there'd be many answers for that.
Sure. So, first of all, there is no, I believe that so somebody owns an area, and whoever owns that area decides on the law. And their decision. So we have two meanings here. First of all, we have local rules, let's call them, or local laws, and there's objective universal law, which is the core. So core laws don't change, which is do not initiate conflict. That's the core law. But then local laws, local rules can change. However, they're also objective, meaning they have an objective conceptual boundary, which is whatever the owner decided. Whatever the owner decided, that's local law objectively. The trick is...
This gets so confusing, because like this is where I got... Yeah, I'll let you finish.
The trick is when you apply laws, which is what Kinsella talks about, where you're the armchair judge. When you apply the law, you're necessarily trying to merge conceptual reality, which is the reality of concepts in your mind, which are objective, and you're trying to connect them epistemically to what you observe. And those connections are not always direct. Like, what you observe is what you observe. The data stream is real and objective, but your interpretation of it and the type of data you receive could be limited. You might not know who is the true owner. You might wager incorrectly. This doesn't mean that there isn't an objective answer at any given time X. There is.
But we might not know it.
But we might not know. And it's not that it's unknowable. It is knowable. We just might not have the resources or the information to answer that. So that's why in a society that accepts multiple judges over ruling over one area, sort of, and you select which judge applies, you might have different rulings. What do they differ in? Can they differ in what is local law? No. Can they differ in what is core law? No. they can differ only in interpretation of what actually happened, what was communicated. If I go into a bar, which is Kinsella's example, and I tell somebody, this is what I think about your mother, and the response is that I get punched in the face, according to Kinsella, I have communicated the consent to get punched in the face by saying those fighting words. I have in fact consented, therefore the punch wasn't aggression. I've initiated the conflict by saying fighting words, because it's understood in society that if you don't respond with a punch to somebody insulting your mother, that means that you've abandoned your self-ownership in front of that guy. And this might sound absurd to you, but that could be the local language. And if it is that local language, the local judge will know it. But there might be some foreigner that showed up in that bar and didn't understand local law and had no intention to initiate that conflict. And now we have what was called a mishap, when there's a misunderstanding and we sort of toss away the intent to commit a crime and there's only the actual act, and we negotiate, because you can only negotiate in such cases. But there is a knowable answer. Somebody is responsible. If you're moving to a new area, you have the responsibility to ask the property owner, what rules am I following? If you're on a voice chat server online, or if you show up to somebody's stream like I am right now, I get local rules. I know many of them I know implicitly. There are certain words I'm not going to say right now, even though they're really fun to say, right? So we always live according to these rules. We understand how this works. And it is very objective, meaning, intersubjective, but it's once Jacob subjectively establishes what the laws are in his channel, they become an objective observation for me, right? It's something that I can have access to. So when we say, oh, this is just a social construct, we're just trying to push a cloud of smoke in front of the audience, right? It matters mind independence, and mind dependence matters in various ways, but you have to be very precise when you apply it, right? The core law is mind independent, meaning it's discoverable. But it is nonsensical to talk about it unless it's discovered by somebody. So in that sense, it is mind dependent. It is an idea that you express, that you've extracted out of reality, right? We've observed reality. We've observed laws of logic in action, things that are themselves. We've observed them, and then we extracted the conception that there are laws of logic, the concept of a concept, and so on. The map of meaning. Those come from reality to us through observation, but then they become conceptual, and we recognize that someone else could have done the same thing. That in fact, there is no way to invalidate that meaning, therefore anyone would have discovered it. We expect an alien species that is achieving reason to have the same foundations. If not mathematics themselves, but something like mathematics based on logic, right? Because mathematics is sort of entrepreneurial, the actual rules that are used, but logic is not entrepreneurial. It is unavoidable. It is an aspect of this universe. And so within this cathedral of existence, there are some things that you cannot avoid. And libertarians ground everything on that fact. So this is where this is what you have to focus on in every debate as well, which is why when libertarians come into a debate and toss all of that aside, why are you a libertarian? Call yourself a libertine. Say that you're for all the things that you consider nice, but don't use this word that has a definition. Writers like Kinsella and Hoppe and Rothbard recognize that. Rothbard conceded his natural law theory to Hoppe's argumentation ethics because he wanted to be closer to logic and away from whim. And so when he noticed something that was closer to logic, he said, I've been superseded and I'm happy for it. I'm glad that somebody built on my work and made it more logical. When Stephen Kinsella brings in his punishment and proportionality writing, he supersedes Hoppe in many ways, and that's good. And there's going to be other progress that's going to happen to sharpen things.
Do you think, this just popped to my mind, do you think Rothbard was right or wrong, or do you think maybe it's, I don't know, something in the middle, when he said libertarianism isn't enough? Because you think he was right? I think he was right too, but that gets, sometimes it's like, I don't know, some libertarians don't like when I quote that Rothbard line, but I think he's right. But I think this is where I think
we should evict all of them. We should evict all of them.
Right,
we should excommunicate them from libertarianism. They really are a poison. They're not helping us reach the remnant.
I also think
they're just one thing. They are so upset at people like Andrew existing. They're trying to use libertarianism to excommunicate people like Andrew. Well, my approach is to get Andrew and others like him to accept our rules.
Right.
I'm perfectly fine with the suicidal communist starving in his little commune by sharing everything and all the means of production. I'm perfectly fine as long as baseline he follows AnCap law, and society as a general recognizes whenever he stops. As soon as he starts aggressing, we all know that this is objectively the case, or we have at least the tool to discover it.
Well, this is what I was telling Andrew in my debate with him, was like, we have overlap in terms of that, like a lot of the moral degradation of society and a lot of the things that you want to see change, whether it comes to people's behavior, when it comes to birth rates, when it comes to religion, like I agree with all that. But I feel like he's using the wrong tool to try to get to the outcomes that he wants. And that's not me being a consequentialist. That's and I think that's what needs to get. But it's like you won't. It's not like being a consequentialist to be like, hey, so to go to your analogy, if your tape measure is faulty and you try to build a house, it's probably gonna come out not the way you wanted it to be, right? So if you're using the wrong.
What they didn't get about my analogy, I don't want the tape measure. I made a meme where there is
the tape measure doesn't tell you what you want to build. It just helps you build what you want to build.
Yeah, like I made a face of Jim Bob, who I often debate libertarianism with, and he's like he's looking at the tape measure and tells it, "Tell me what to build. Why don't you tell me what to build?" And the whole point is that it's a tape measure. What do you want? Do you want to measure stuff with your fingers? No, you have a tool. It's a tool. That's it. It doesn't need to do more. In fact, it would be stupid. It would be backwards to want it to do more. How dare it tell you what to build? How dare it? There are other tools. Open the Bible. That tells you what to build.
So this is what I was trying to get into this in my conversation with Andrew after Dave's debate, where I was like, Andrew, because he's like, well, he insists that if I view my Christian morality as like, because like I do care about my Christian faith more than my libertarian principles, but I don't think there's a conflict. And he's like, well, no, there has to be a conflict there. And I'm like, Andrew, my Christian principles help tell me what is right and wrong, right? And they're kind of like my moral compass. And I think that the Bible does have some things in it. And this is a lot of what I usually talk about on my podcast is I go to passages that do talk about the horizontal relationships, that talk about government, that talk about human relationships and authority and how people should treat one another, interact and organize, how governments should act, how leaders should act. There are even things in the Bible that do pertain to economics. But guess what? There's more than what people might realize. But at the end of the day, the Bible is not a economics textbook, and it's not an exhaustive political theory or legal theory. it gives us some core principles, but it's not fully expounded. And I'm like, Andrew, in the same way that the Bible is not going to give you advanced physics to help you build a rocket to go to the moon. For those of you that believe in the moon landing, I'm just making a joke for libertarian libertarian internet. That's the wrong tool for the job. The libertarian legal theory is just like Austrian economics, where it's like these are tools that Christians should realize are not in conflict with our core ethical principles, but rather these are tools that help us to push our core ethical principles into the world and to better preserve them, because the state is the worst tool for preserving Christian values. And I think history proves that.
I should present this as another idea because there's many people in chat right now who are not Christian and who are recoiling at all of this, pro-Christianity messaging. And okay, you have, Opar, the objectivist philosophy of Ayn Rand. You can try to build an alternative, and interestingly, objectivism suffers from the same problem as Christianity, which is it doesn't have a good legal theory. Ayn Rand did not think things through as well as other people who thought about law. She doesn't have punishment.
Well, and she hated the people who did.
Yes, okay, let's defend Ayn Rand and Andrew Wilson for their hate of libertarianism and explain why they do.
I kind of get why, yeah.
Yeah, because even
Rothbard eventually got there. Rothbard eventually ended up hating libertarians too.
because the word libertarian has been corrupted. When I speak to Andrew and I tell him that I'm building a bridge with you, where I'm describing to you how you can have a Christian community and how you can have this tool to identify core criminality, so that when your community goes sour, those are the warning sign. This is the tool, and we can coexist where my slightly less Christian community is going to trade with yours and is going to control a different set of lands, and eventually I might merge with yours or I might not, but we'll have these different experiments. When I talk to him about these ideas, he accepts them. In fact, most likely, deep within, he believes that this is how we should behave. But let's look at who's he debating with. Who are these people on Twitter, on X, that block philosophical debates? Who are these people that just meme in response to serious philosophical questions? Who are these people who can't answer directly what is a conflict, who keep saying property instead of ownership, who keep saying outdated things like labor theory of property, who keep saying things that are just have been refuted.
It made me so angry when Chase Oliver had that tweet about labor theory. I was just like, oh no.
Or even
all labor does not have value.
Angela is great, right? The Libertarian Party, McCardle, I believe, right? She's great.
Yeah. But
when she says things like argumentation ethics is a good way to start talking about moral imperatives, I'm like, where are you going? Why? This is exactly, no, it's not. It's something completely different. It is useful because we can talk about law separate from morality. Before morality, as the chessboard, I don't care what game of chess you're going. I mean, I actually do personally care what game of chess we're going to play. And this is why I believe that in order to have a coherent game, you need to have the rules. Otherwise, you're going to think you're playing chess, but somebody is going to move the pieces all wrong, and it's going to be pure nonsense. And your intentions are going to be ruined because of that. Your society is going to go to garbage. This is why it's important, because I want to keep things as objectively as possible. This is the problem with most moral philosophies. They go from something subjective, and then they connect with subjective reality, or subjective perception of reality, understanding of reality. So they don't have anything objective in the core concept, meaning because they don't have, let's say, Christianity or something else. They don't have objectivism. They don't have libertarian core law. And they're trying to connect it with observations that are also relative. What do you get? You get people just abusing this relationship to claim whatever they want, whenever they want. And if you reduce it down to the absolute simplest level, it's just obfuscation of the law of the jungle every single time. When I had a fight with a guy on X who claimed that, some directly wrong, he knows that's a wrong historical claim. He claimed that the United States never committed mass atrocities, or Great Britain. Laughable on its face. But how can he do this? How can he lie to everybody's faces? Because he doesn't even believe in objective truth seeking. What happens when people engage in the law of the jungle is eventually they realize, I just have to win at all costs. Principles don't matter. And so they start lying openly. They start making a friend-enemy distinction in how they speak about reality. If my friend does something, then it's good, even if it's evil. But if my enemy does something that they can present as evil, then I'm going to apply the law to it. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, nothing. So you end up with these nonsensical debates. Who cares? Who cares what these two guys will do if they don't have a baseline?
So let me ask you this, because I feel like we've found a lot of overlap and common ground, and on arguing for libertarian legal theory, on why it's true, on why it's objective, sharpening up some of these arguments and whatnot. I think where Dave and I are coming from sometimes, where we can sometimes find ourselves in difficult positions, is when we're trying to, and this probably Dave more than me, because Dave gets on huge platforms, and he's trying to kind of appeal to people who have if a lot of the people who are tuning in to the shows he gets on, if they hopped on this show right now, 95% of what we were talking about went over their heads, because we're kind of talking about the meat right now, right? And I like the biblical analogy of the milk before bread and bread before meat, right? And I feel like Dave's out there trying to give people libertarianism in breast milk or formula form, right? He's trying to water it down for people, or to at least get them thinking more in a libertarian paradigm. But this is tricky sometimes, because it's I think you, and I think a lot of libertarians like you, are sort of used to well, the right thing to do is to always kind of bite these bullets. And I feel like Dave and I fall into this a lot myself. Sometimes I feel like there are certain contexts. So let me on the Crucible, which is a debate.
It's not just bite the bullets, but as soon as you bite the bullet, you have to fire back. If you don't fire back, you end up just biting bullets, and it looks bad.
Well, let me clarify. If you're on a debate stage, if you're on the Crucible debating, I think I kind of agree with you. If I'm having a more informal debate or conversation with a bunch of normies watching, it is, and this was my concern when I was first debating Andrew, which I think I was wrong there, but I'm kind of used to kind of going, I don't know if I want people to get the impression that libertarians are oh yeah, we're I don't want to feed into misconceptions about things where people go, oh, libertarians just want to abolish age of consent stuff, right? And they just want to normalize things like CP, and this is why I had a problem with Liquid Zulu, not because I thought he's a bad guy, but I was just I get really annoyed when we get on social media and we say things that are just so easy to take out of context, that are going to make it look like libertarians aren't arguing for this beautiful legal theory that helps us so much, but rather it's anyway. How do you address that concern that people like Dave and I have?
I have a disagreement with Liquid Zulu on this, because Liquid Zulu is a provocateur. So what he likes to do is to say the objectively correct thing, which is it's not a crime to possess any information, no matter how vile. It's just not a crime, unless the way you acquired it was criminal. But that's the way you acquired it was criminal, meaning you were accessory to a crime, you were funding a crime being committed. All of that, sure, can be a conspiracy to commit a crime. The actual possession is not a crime, and you know it because the police officer, the private investigator that goes with a camera and engages in chats and brings out those vile people to X, like the Rosen guy, he has to have had that stuff in his possession at one point or the other, simply because he goes on the chat room where he encounters the predator, meaning he sees the bad stuff, meaning he has it in his possession, in his ownership, meaning it's not objectively a crime to do so. Most of the audience admits that at least the crime fighter has to possess that stuff temporarily as he destroys it, has to own that stuff as he destroys it. So it's like it's become now my criticism of Liquid Zulu is that I believe that you need to slap down, which say, yes, I buy the bullet, but then pivot towards what your solution is, which is, in my Covenant community, dealing with that stuff, if you get detected and you get discovered and we're going to make an effort, you lose all your property, you end up naked in the street outside of my Covenant community. What you do from there, whether you starve or you find a group of degenerates to accept you, doesn't matter. In fact, we're going to even advertise who you are to others in our contact system, in our trade network. And shunning, which is something that the Amish in the United States are successfully doing, they don't have an access to aggression because they're pacifists. So they happen to be what I call natural anarchists, natural AnCaps. They don't have a problem with any of the CP or any of that stuff. If they discover a member of their community does any of this type of stuff, the shunning eliminates their ability to interact with the Amish, with their family, with their children, with their wife, forever. No turning back. Also, the Amish have another solution, which is they read each other's internet history. It is considered immoral in their society to have a private internet account because you're going to be drawn into sin. And so a brother is a brother's keeper, and each brother has to watch what the other brother browses, and that keeps them honest. It keeps away the private temptation. So they don't have those problems without any government, whereas we have a government that is in fact, or in non-claim, using this as a tool for power by having people get exposed to this stuff, get caught with this stuff, and instead of unmasking them, using that stuff as a lever of power to keep people in check within the political system. This is why we occasionally see the politician get unmasked as, a user or a distributor of this type of stuff, and then nothing happens. This is why we have, a certain island where certain things happen, and the client list has not been revealed yet. This is the government that you advocate for. You start grandstanding. I'm grandstanding right now, and if I was debating somebody like Andrew or somebody like Michael, like Knowles, I would say, well, your government is in fact the one that's spreading that stuff. You have a false belief in a state, whereas the state recognizes that stuff is a super strong lever of power, and it's going to abuse it. And I can give you countless histories of the church being abused. When the KGB wanted to infiltrate the Orthodox Church, and it did, the number one tool it used to coerce priests is LGBT stuff and the stuff we just discussed.
Yeah. No, and I agree with everything you're saying, and it's just like you got to be careful. Like I'm not against talking about these subjects, but I'm just very careful and intentional about how I do so, because I don't want it to be taken out of context and used to. But
you saw the way I'm speaking. Me. I'm counterattacking. Yes. I'm building my counterattack. Right. I'm saying first I put a little bit of seed of doubt. Listen, it's okay sometimes, right? So it's not always not okay. And then we're going to look in the general case how it's actually solved. And I'm
There's also a huge difference.
pressuring back. This is not what
Yeah.
Liquid Zulu does, and I criticize him for it. I don't think he's doing that well.
Well, because he's
There's a
not
difference-
like he's not in a conversation like this being asked and then going on a long explanation like you did. He just literally was like, just almost
he's
just
saying,
shitposting, just being like,
it's not
hey,
a crime. It's not a crime. Sure, it's a moral
which is
crime.
like,
It's
but
not a
then like
legal
people
crime.
who, again, I don't think that he's an actual like evil person, but like it just gives the impression like, well, why are there libertarians going out there and like signaling, hey, it's not a crime to own CP?
Let me explain why. But let me explain why. Because if we take the remnant and we cut away the remnant, we only keep libertarians that agree that it's not a crime. And we cut away all the people that instantly cope, that instantly recoil, that can't think logically. There's a guy that said in chat something about the Big Tent and how we should like be sort of there's a weakness of libertarians to gatekeep. It's weakness of libertarians to gatekeep incorrectly. However, it is a strength of the ideology. A lot of ideologies that became super powerful in human history started out as the strongest gatekeepers. Ayatollah Khomeini, I'm sorry, but when he conquered Iran, he didn't do so by bending Sharia law to fit the moment. He implemented Sharia law as strictly as he possibly could, and people liked it because compared to the flexible and not here, not there law of the society they used to have, his courts actually produced results that people knew. They knew if they go to that court, that's the result they would get, if that's the fact pattern. And while the laws that they followed are vile and highly aggressive, the fact that they're consistent makes them superior to many liberal societies for people. Because people, number one, want consistency in their life. They want to know what is expected. That's why people succumb to authoritarian rule, because consistency and knowing what will happen is better than inconsistency and arbitrary nonsense. You go out into the street and you can't defend yourself because defending yourself might be considered aggression by the state. That's an inconsistency, and I live in that city, in that society. I don't like it. I wouldn't love living in Iran, but maybe my lifespan and the potential for the most tragic outcomes would be reduced there because I'm not part of a particular group they victimize. But they're very strict against the petty criminal that can, cut my purse or steal from me or do other vile things to me. So this is the problem we're having with libertarian debates. It's like they're saying, well, let's not let's gatekeep and pull everybody towards us. Let's make as many people Hoppian, Kinselian, and Dominiacian, right? Let's pull people back into the philosophy and make sure that when a libertarian shows up to a major debate or shows up to Tim Pool, they don't quote Buchanan, they don't quote Scott Horton, with all due respect. They quote our jurists, which we have plenty of, and they make people. I have there's a friend, Ian Hearsom, who wrote an article called "The Rational Theory for the Rights of Children." He combined works by Bloch, Kinsella, Hoppe, Dominiak to produce a coherent theory that explains guardianship, our position, and explains why we are actually best suited towards defending the rights of children, even against their parents. And I use that theory in a debate directly. I directly quote this article and explain what it says about children's rights. That we have stronger children's rights under AnCap than under the state. Because I'm engaging with jurists, I can't be an expert in everything. I have to read other people's work. And I have to know the core principles to understand where they are skirting the line. Right? I have to have the tools to analyze what they're writing so that I don't defend, silly stuff or don't use stuff that's inherently broken.
Yeah. So last thing I'll touch on here. Again, like you and I think first crossed paths back when the controversy of the day was over immigration. that's when I've ever since I became a libertarian, my views on that have been ever evolving. I've been every immigration position I think a libertarian can take, or at least a professing libertarian could take, I think I've had at one point. I think we always agree. Like I think, like whatever criticisms you have for Dave, you, Dave, and I would all agree that the ideal setup is a private property society, like 100%. Um, I suppose, and now some libertarians on my side, including my uh, 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 sorry, Carrie Baldwin, which I know you're familiar with her. She's even been critical of me because she's saying that
Right.
that Dave and I are um, we're falling for the fear that the state uses to kind of be like, oh, there's a crisis, right? There's always like a crisis that the state's pushing, and right now they're pushing an immigration crisis. And when they're pushing a crisis like, oh, Russia's going to invade Ukraine and then they're going to, take over all of Europe, right? We don't fall for that, fear mongering. But when it comes to the immigration one, she says that we're being somewhat susceptible to it. I guess like my concern is that while I agree with, if we're just arguing for what is true and what the right way to structure society is, we're going to be aligned. I sometimes find myself butting heads with the jurist type libertarians, as you're describing, because I feel like they, I don't know what their practical solutions are for moving us closer to a libertarian society or for solving problems in the here and now, because I don't know, like I understand having a low time preference, but like not everything can be solved with a low time preference. Like if I have a, if I'm someone breaks into my house in the middle of the night, I can't exactly deal with that through a low time preference. I have to have a high time preference for my response there, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
there are some, and I'm using those terms a little bit loosely, but I think you know what I mean.
Here's the problem sort of with some jurists is that they just, and I think that's actually good. That's not even a problem. That's like a virtue of them. They're like a compass. A compass is telling you that north is north, even if you're about to step off a cliff.
Sure,
okay?
and I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Right now, if you are a popularizer like Dave and like many others, like you, like I am, then you would want to have prepared solutions to these problems that are libertarian. And one of the things that is sort of annoying to me about the crowd that I debated with on both sides. So I'm annoyed by the jurists who don't present the innovative solutions that I can present, but I'm also equally distraught by the other side who's just shutting all arguments down and are claiming anyone who's in favor of quote unquote open borders is not even a libertarian. What? No, it's you who is not a libertarian if you're against libertarian open borders. I'm sorry, you're just not. And for you to tell others that they're not, that's preposterous. That's illogical. Now, the fact that this intellectual laziness of falsely excommunicating others over their open border stance prevents you from creating private borders, prevents you from discovering the things that purely open borders libertarians just don't think about either, because they don't care about solving it. They care about being right in the debate. So
what solution
there's a middle ground there.
Sure.
Specifically, well, one thing I discovered is that I object to the notion that public property is inherently abandoned. And I made a very
okay, because that was Liquid Zulu's argument, which I didn't like that argument at all.
Well, it's fine that you don't like it. You have an instinct to not like it. Listen, Walter Block had an instinct that he didn't like abortion. He really doesn't like abortion. He doesn't like the killing of babies. But then Walter Block said, I don't like this. What tools do I have? And then from that struggle of not being able to abandon his principles and at the same time wanting to save the children, he came up with a brilliant solution that we're now using for many, many other applications. He came up with the idea of forestalling, that guardianship cannot be just abandonment at the same time. If you're abandoning, meaning harming your child, you're not a guardian. And if you don't declare it to other people based on this obligation you took when you became a guardian, which is an obligation, one of the few you can incur, it's an obligation because the inverse of it is a crime. You become a criminal, in fact, when you forestall. So we gained this idea of forestalling, meaning the use of a property which you don't own, which you abandon, the use of a guardianship which you've abandoned, but you don't declare it to others, that is an aggression. He discovered that through that struggle. Similarly, with the borders, there are possible arguments, including mine, that people are simply not aware of because both sides of the debate are lazy. They're lazy to explore. One side says, we're technically right, therefore screw you, just accept it or die. And the other side says, we're unwilling to die, therefore we're going to throw out all the ethics altogether and be inconsistent on that question and say aggression is sometimes necessary, where it's a guy from China or Iran crossing the border because they're very suspicious and they're likely here to conquer us. Yes, they're likely here to conquer you. Yes, it's conquest. Yes, it's supported by the regime. Yes, it's there to poison you. Yes, it's there to destroy your high trust society. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to aggress? Are you going to bite that bullet? Why? Does it mean you've exhausted all your possibilities? So here's one possibility. It's not abandoned. If you analyze it from the position of the two components of a crime, which is the act and the intent, and the two components of restitution and retribution, it is impossible for a government contractor who got paid in tax money to abandon any property that was created through that, if they are the owner. It's impossible for a collective of criminals to abandon the money bag, which holds everybody's cash. It's not considered abandoned. And I found a very simple quote-unquote loophole of how to reinforce that it's not abandoned. I claim right now that I own every single collective property in the United States. And if you hear that claim, you're done for. You can no longer claim that it's abandoned because you have to contend with me as the guardian of all of that. I don't claim ownership of everything that is public. I merely claim guardianship. And the fact that I claim that, if Liquid Zulu watches the stream later, and he did when I claimed this the same, I made a meme, I claimed it, well, it's a very serious meme. I claimed the entire New York City. Everything that's public is under my guardianship until somebody claims that I'm not doing enough to enforce it and enforces it stronger. The only way you can dislodge me from this position is to demonstrate that you're doing it better, meaning you have the power to do more than just talk about it. You have the power to implement it. But as soon as I said that claim, you can no longer claim that it's abandoned because I am its guardian. And guardianship is not ownership. I don't have to prove ownership of anything, in fact. It is then, if the state collapses the next day, I will be the first in line responsible to start accepting claims from taxpayers. If somebody wants to sell off their share of all the taxes they paid to New York City, they could come to me and I will start the ledger and they will be number one. And the next person that comes in will be number two. And they will be able to present all of their tax information for the past since they were born. And then we will decide on a first-comer basis how to split up the money bag that was established by the state. There, I've solved most of the problems that Dave Smith was concerned about. Now, if you're Dave Smith or someone else, anyone else who's pro-Hoppe and closed borders, and you claim that an Iranian or a Chinese guy can't cross the border, walk into an empty plot of land, and start their own, Amish community, you're just wrong. You're forestalling. Forestalling is illegal. For Martian lands in the middle of the United States, that plot of land where they land, they can develop, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only solution for you is to privatize everything, which is what we all agree on as the end point. Start with privatizing public property, and then privatize everything. And it's very easy to privatize in our society, in our conception. You build a fence around something that no one else or the government used to own. Build a fence around the entire United States that sort of goes around everybody's private property, and those chunks that you've outlined will be yours. Maintain that fence, communicate that fence, and you will solve the problem. You will block access to all future Martians, okay? This is the solution. And it sounds nonsensical. maybe, but this is the libertarian solution. And in public property, it's actually quite simple. Just declaring it already allows you to exclude. As a guardian, I can exclude the person who's a foreigner who never paid taxes from access to the public school, from access to the public park. I can exclude them as a guardian.
I feel like we should have a whole follow-up conversation on this, and we're out of time here. But I want to give you. I have one question. I just really want to get off my chest. If you can give me, I know it's gonna kill you to give you like a 30-second answer. But would you say that this is more or less true, that the disagreement that at least you have with Dave is not in maybe the concern he has, or not even in the belief that maybe there should be something done other than just putting our hands up and going, oh, well, all these people are coming here, there's nothing we can do about it. But that what you don't like is that while advocating for solutions, he's sort of not doing a good job at arguing for those potential solutions in a way that at least is attempting to be reconciled well enough to libertarian theory. Is that a good way to kind of summarize your concern? You're muted.
Sorry. Specifically when he says things like, I'm willing to exclude somebody from a property I don't own, which is forestalling, then at least he recognizes it as a crime. He should at least do that. He should say, I'm stealing the penny. I'm doing what needs to be done for survival because there's no other way, because we're hanging over a volcano or whatever other analogy.
Gotcha.
That's minimum. And maximum, he should start reading the ethics because they have solutions he's not thinking about. Open your mind and read books that are recent. This is something somebody said. You said, I think, when you introduced me, Kasimir is about the traditions of libertarianism. And I sort of had an internal laugh. Our traditions are 5 years old. Some of the best writing in libertarianism has been written in the past 5 years. Ian Hearsam's article is the best current article on the rational theory for the rights of children. Highly,
I'm really interested in that, by the way. Please send that to me when you get a chance, because I actually just did an episode on the rights of. I think you watched that one, the one I did with Carrie Baldwin on self-ownership and the
she's brilliant.
Parental rights and stuff. Yeah. So we do have to sign off here. Cass, I'll give you the last word if you want to plug anything or anything, and then like I said, we should do a whole follow-up on this to kind of explore more of these solutions to things like immigration and whatnot. You're great. This was great. Like I loved our conversation. Hope we can do this many more times. But my voice and my wife will not allow this to continue anymore. And my as of right now, my wife owns me.
I surrender to the wife aggro, which is superior to discussions about jurism.
Yeah.
Listen, I'll say it very fast. The Crucible and other debate stages. The Crucible was one of the best debate stages we have right now, because the format is brilliant. The fact that it brings in the audience to correct certain things, to be able to provide angles, is great. The host, Andrew, is a very, very generous and fair host. And the fact that people don't understand what he's doing and are so weak, so sort of, in my mind, lazy, that they find it hurtful. To me, it is the hurtfulness of a petulant child that gets bossed around by a father. You know, Andrew is your debate father figure. He bossed you around because he has to, because you've given him the opportunity and he stole all your bases. No need to cope. It's going to be fine. You're going to become stronger. That's what the Crucible does. You know, metal meets metal. You grow stronger.
It's biblical principle is iron sharpens iron.
You have to do this, because if you don't do this, you're not going to lose to friendly Christians. You're going to lose to the evil communists that are masters at sophistry. So in order to defeat sophistry, we cannot become sophists ourselves. We have to know how to grandstand. We have to know all the tools of rhetoric. The blood sport, you know, the insult that's properly timed, the humor, and knowing where to be philosophically accurate and how to use philosophy to solve problems instead of treating it as if it's a weight on your shoulders. It's not. It's the compass that shows you true north, and it's your job to get there.
Awesome. Well, Cass, this was a lot of fun. Like I said, I hope to do it again sometime. I appreciate it. It was definitely a good learning experience for me, which is, the whole point of doing a podcast and doing debates and whatnot. It's for self-improvement and growth. So, and speaking of growth, please, everyone watching, before we sign off, like this if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't, especially if you want to see me talk again with our good friend Cass here in the future. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys tonight. As I sign off, I will say give you the same sign off I always give, which is to live at peace and live for Christ.